let's talk pumpkin. Pumpkin is a great base crop to grow because it provides your homestead with a whole lot of food on just one single vine. And the great thing about pumpkins is that they come with their very own sustainable packaging. So this means that your pumpkins can be stored to use throughout the year. Pumpkin is really easy to grow if you get a few key things right. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how to grow pumpkins, how to start them from seed, how to care and look after those pumpkins, how to get the most pumpkins out of each vine, and whether you need to grow more than one plant. I'm also going to talk about how to know when pumpkins are ready to harvest. We're going to harvest one from my garden as well, so I'll show you that, as well as how to prepare them for storage and reproduce that plant. And make sure you stick around to the end because we're going to make a super easy and delicious pumpkin soup using the whole pumpkin plant. Because yes, not only can we eat the pumpkins from the pumpkin plant, but there is so much other food provided from that plant that we're going to talk about and we're going to cook today. So it really is going to be a garden to plate cooking, which is something that I love to do and I cannot wait to share it with you. And this idea comes from my membership, where every month I highlight a new plant of the month and provide a whole info sheet on everything to grow, cook, preserve and reproduce that plant, as well as some recipes which are also linked. So that is what I do inside my membership. But today I thought I would start a new series here on my YouTube channel featuring some of those plant of the months. So make sure you hit subscribe and check out the playlist that I'm going to start creating with all these different edible plants, so you can find out everything that you need to know to grow, cook, preserve and reproduce that plant. Because learning how to save seeds or take cuttings and reproduce plants that you've grown in your garden is going to help you create a sustainable garden as well as a secure food source. And that is so amazing, it's so powerful. So by the end of this video, you're going to know how to have a endless supply of pumpkins. But now let's get straight into what varieties of pumpkin should you grow and how do you grow them. So there are three main species of pumpkin. Depending on where you live in the world, there will be other types that you will consider pumpkins as well, and that can be different types of winter squash, such as the butternut squash, even the Seminole pumpkin. Those are part of the Mushata species, and I'm going to share some of the most popular varieties and how to decide which one to grow. Different variety of pumpkin has different qualities, so it's really good to learn about these different varieties of pumpkins so you can decide which one is going to be best to grow in your garden. And that can be determined on a couple of different things. The main ones are how much space you have available. So some pumpkins vines grow really large and they grow really large pumpkins, so you're going to need a little bit more space than other varieties which can be quite compact bushy vines and grow smaller pumpkins, which will be more suited to your urban gardens, your balcony gardens, your courtyard gardens, your container gardens. So how much space you have available can really be a good deciding factor when you're choosing what variety of pumpkin to grow. The other thing is some pumpkins have better storage qualities than others. So if you're wanting to grow a year's supply of pumpkin and you want some pumpkins that are going to store for a really long time, then it's best to choose those specific varieties that have good storage. And that is generally because they have thicker skins, so they've got better packaging and they have a better shelf life. So if that is something that you're wanting to do, is to create this big pumpkin patch and have a whole lot of pumpkins that you can store and use throughout the year, then choosing one of those varieties will be more beneficial to you. I'll go through a few of the most popular ones and what they're good for, so you can decide what pumpkin is right for you. So these are just a few of the different types of pumpkins that you can grow. There's obviously a whole lot more. Is the Jarrahdale pumpkin, and that is an heirloom from Australia, from our very own Western Australia. It is a really large pumpkin. It's got a ribbed outside skin and it's got an orange flesh. They grow pretty large. They're about 5 kgs each pumpkin, and they're really good for storage because they do have that hard outer skin. Another one is the Queensland Blue, and that is very similar and it is an Australian heirloom as well, and that has a bluish grey skin. It is really easy to grow and also has really good storage. Another one is the Turk's Turban, and that is a really interesting one to grow. It has beautiful multicoloured outside colours like orange, green. They are an heirloom from the 1800s and they also have really good storage qualities. Another one is the golden nugget, and that is a compact bushy plant. So this one is going to be really good for your container gardens, your urban gardens, because it is going to be a little bit more smaller of a plant and it has smaller 1 kg pumpkins, and these can be really good for stuffing as well. We've got the blue Hubbard, which is another bluish grey pumpkin. It is a heirloom from the early, I think, 1700s. It's a really old variety, and these are great. They have a really good long storage life and they can grow, I think, up to 10 kgs each, so they're really decent sized pumpkins and they're going to provide a whole lot of food. We've got the Lakota pumpkin, and that is one that I grew here a couple of years ago. They are orange and green on the outside and they have a sort of bell shape. They're a really beautiful one to have growing in the garden, and I found the storage on them wasn't as long as some of the other ones, but they did store for a good few months. Giant pumpkin, the Dills Atlantic giant pumpkin. This is a really fun novelty one to grow, and you can get pumpkins up to 250 kilos or 220 kilos. Monster pumpkins. The eating on these wouldn't be that amazing, but they'd still be really good for soups, and that's just something really fun to grow. It's always fun to try new things in the garden, and that is something that I want to try. The only thing is, like, they are going to take up a lot of space and they're going to need a whole lot of food. And then if we are talking about the winter squash, then you can't go past the butternut. It is one of my favorites. It's a really easy one to grow. It grows a lot of pumpkins on one vine, and you can eat the whole thing. You can eat the skin as well. I like to crisp it up in the oven and make chips, and as well as the seeds. Those are also edible and they make really good snacks. And last but not least is my favourite winter squash / pumpkin, and that is the Kent pumpkin. It has speckles on the outside and it's a really good all-round pumpkin. I use it probably the most out of all of the pumpkin. The other great thing about the Kent pumpkin is that it does really well in poor soil. I have really sandy poor soils and it does really well. So when do we grow pumpkins? This is going to be different depending on where you are in the world and what season you're in, but generally you're going to want to plant your pumpkin seeds at the end of winter or the start of spring, depending on whether you're going to be planting them inside or if you're going to plant them direct in the garden. If you're super organized and you want to get a head start on growing pumpkins, you can sow your seeds indoors in seed trays at the end of winter, and then you can transplant them outside into the garden when you've had your last frost, and that way you have already got the ball rolling, you've already got them on the go. The seedlings will be a little bit stronger, so they will withstand pests when they are planted out into the garden. Here in Perth, I plant my seeds at the end of winter inside, or I'll plant a few direct in the garden in spring. And now we're in autumn, so that is when my pumpkins are ready. They're getting ready to harvest now. Alright, so top tips on how to grow pumpkins. The first thing you want to do is pick a sunny location and a decent amount of space, because pumpkins are ramblers. They're going to take up quite a bit of space, but at least a minimum of 1 square meter of space. If you are growing in a small contained area and you're going to be growing in a pot or a container, then choose one of those varieties that is a little bit smaller. It's not going to need as much nutrients as well, so those smaller pumpkins won't need as much food as the larger pumpkins. Next up, we're going to pile on the compost. Think of pumpkins as basically like the hungry pigs of the garden. They want as much food as they can get because they are producing really big nutrient dense fruit, so they need the fuel to be able to produce those pumpkins, and we want to produce as many pumpkins as we can on a vine, so we need lots of food. So we're going to pile on a big heap of compost, and then you can plant your seedling on top of that pile of compost. That means there's going to be a whole lot of food available when the roots start to grow. To plant the seeds, you put the little spiky bit down in the rounded top facing up, but if you're not too sure, just don't stress too much. Seeds are very clever and can turn themselves around. So I just pop it in the soil, and then I'm going to put about 1 inch of soil on top of the seed, press it down, and then pop a label in there so I know what I've planted, as well as a stake so I know where to water, and give it a good water in. and then cover it all up with a mulch, which will again start to break down and also provide food for that plant during the growing season. It'll also retain the moisture, because that's another important thing, is that we need to keep our pumpkins well watered. One key thing that is important when growing pumpkins is to not wet the leaves. So something you can do that's a really good trick is to pop a stick or a stake next to where you plant the pumpkin, so that when it creates these rambling vines everywhere, you'll know where the base of the plant is, so you can water there, because you don't want to be watering the whole plant, because the leaves are going to be really susceptible to mildew and other diseases. So we want to make sure the leaves stay dry. So by putting that stick there, you'll know exactly where to water, even if it's all a mess. Alright, so we've got our pumpkins planted. Now what? How do we care for them? How do we maintain them? How do we make sure that we are going to get the best pumpkins off this vine? So you can feed your pumpkins every few weeks using a liquid seaweed or a liquid fertilizer. That is always going to help boost the nutrition available for the plant. The other things that we're going to be doing is keeping that moisture off the leaves, and we're going to keep an eye on pollination. This is something that a lot of people run into problems with when they're growing pumpkins, is that they start to form a little pumpkin and they shrivel up and die, and they don't become a natural pumpkin, and usually that is from a lack of pollination. So each plant has both male and female flowers. You don't need more than one vine. They'll both produce male and female flowers on the same vine. The main thing is that they'll usually produce male flowers first, and this is to attract all those pollinators to the pumpkin patch, and then later on you'll start to see more of those female flowers, which have the little baby pumpkins on the bottom. So down here we've got a female flower. So the female flower has a little mini pumpkin on the bottom of it, as you can see there, that will turn into a large pumpkin if it is pollinated. What you would do is you would look for a male flower right here. It's a little bit old, but this is a male flower, and as you can see, it does not have a mini pumpkin on the bottom, and it has a stamen with pollen on it. So if I wanted to pollinate this, I would just simply remove it, or you can get a paintbrush. Then what we would do is just take off the petals. So here we have a pollen now coated stamen, which is like a little paintbrush, and we can dust the pollen on the female flower, which is already a bit closed up, but I'll just show you what we'll do. So we're just going to open up the flower and dust a little bit of the pollen in there. Carefully open it up. It is a bit too old to be doing this, but then we'll just dust a bit of pollen inside, and then close it back up so that it's secure and shut. Here we have another female flower. So as you can see inside, that is where we would dust the pollen, inside there. And it's best to do this first thing in the morning. That's when the flowers open, and then they close throughout the day. As always, it's really important to attract pollinators to your garden, so by planting lots of flowers around your pumpkin patch or around your whole garden, interplanted between everything, is how I like to do it. That's going to help bring more of your pollinators to your garden, and you won't have to hand pollinate in the future. Slugs and snails may attack your small seedlings when they're still young and vulnerable. This is another reason it can be a good idea to start your seeds off inside and wait till the plants are stronger and hardier before they get planted out into the garden. If not, just plant a few extras and take a look at my video on natural pest management if you are wanting to make sure that they're not eaten by bugs before you get a chance to grow them. It is important to check your pumpkin vines regularly, because the critters will find them. So rats can often find your pumpkins and start gnawing at the actual pumpkin itself. So if I notice that happening, then I will put cages around my pumpkins, or sometimes just I put a pot on top of them, and that is enough to deter them from eating my pumpkins. How to know when your pumpkin is ready to harvest? let's go take a look. Let's go harvest a pumpkin. My pumpkin vine is looking a little bit sad at the moment. It is now autumn, it's ready to harvest my pumpkins, so it's done its dash. It's starting to get powdery mildew, which is what happens when there's lots more moisture in the air. So naturally the pumpkin vine will start to die off, and that's when you've got more of a chance of seeing these ripe pumpkins. Alright, so over here is a pot which I popped into of my pumpkin because I noticed a rat was eating it. So since I popped the pot on top, we've had no more damage. So to tell if this pumpkin is ripe, there's a few things I do. One is I give it a good, which sounds a little bit hollow. Also the leaves and the tendrils are starting to die off closest to the pumpkin. So you can see here there was a tendril and a leaf, and that's dried off, and again down here as well. This one is ready to pick compared with over here. Over here this is a younger one. It's still green, it's quite soft, and the little tendril is still green. Green tendril, green soft pumpkin, and it doesn't sound very hollow. So we want to cut the pumpkin with as much stem left on as we can, because if we cut it too close here we could damage the pumpkin. So we're going to give it as much stem as we can. Just chop it there. Now we need to go and prepare this for curing. So because this pumpkin has got damage on the outside, it will not be good for long-term storage. So you want to check all your pumpkins for any scratches or damage. So any pumpkins that have any damage to their outside skin, their packaging, then those ones are not going to do well long-term in storage. So go through all your pumpkins and clean them. We're going to wash off the dirt, and we're going to check to see which ones are fully complete and they don't have chunks out of them. Okay, so we've got our pumpkins harvested, and if you've got a whole bunch of these, you're going to want to do it outside. But all you want to do is rinse off any of that extra dirt and soil, and so we're going to wash that off, and then I'm going to also give them a bit of a rinse off with some apple cider vinegar, and that's just going to help kill off any of the bacteria that might be on the outside of the pumpkin, so that way that they can be stored and be nice and clean with no bacteria. So I've just mixed some apple cider vinegar and I've got a bit of water, just getting off any of that extra soil, cleaning off any bacteria. I'm just going to dry off a bit of the extra moisture, and then we're going to pop these somewhere to cure. So curing means that we're going to harden up the outside of the pumpkin even more than it already is. So that means that it will store for a lot longer. So to cure your pumpkins, all you want to do is get them nice and clean, and then we're going to pop them somewhere dry, warm, sunny, out of the weather for about 1 to 2 weeks. So if you do live in a really dry place, you can leave them out in the garden to cure, but if you have any chance of rain or rats or anything eating or getting to your pumpkins, then you might want to bring them in under cover on your deck, on your balcony, somewhere that's nice and sunny and sheltered. So I'm going to pop these in my bar area outside, which has an undercover, gets lots of nice sunlight, and that will just help cure these pumpkins and get the skins extra hard so that they store well. And then once you've done that, once your pumpkins have cured, they've been out in the sun for 1 to 2 weeks, then you can pop them somewhere for long-term storage. So for long-term storage, you want to put them again somewhere really dry, out of the weather, and also quite dark. You don't want to be storing them in a sunny situation long term. You want to have them somewhere dark and cool. So some people like to store their pumpkins outside on a deck covered in. I do have neighborhood rats, so I don't like to keep mine outside, but I keep mine inside, and I also always make sure that you put down something so that they're not sitting on tiles or laminate or anything like that, because that's going to promote moisture underneath the pumpkins, and we want to make sure our pumpkins are kept nice and dry. So to store your pumpkins, it's a good idea to put down some cardboard or some plywood or something like that to sit your pumpkins on top of, so that they don't get all moist and promote mold and bacteria growing underneath. You want to have really good airflow, so don't stack your pumpkins on top of each other. Keep them all separate so that there's enough airflow, because we want to make sure our pumpkins are nice and dry and don't go moldy or anything like that. So you'll know if your pumpkins are starting to go off, it's because they will start to go soft. And also another thing to note is there's lots of sugars in these pumpkins, and so often sometimes some of that can come out here, which is the flower, the end of the flower, and some sticky sap will come out. So don't be concerned about that, that is normal, but that can create sticky residue on the base of where you're storing the pumpkin. So you don't want to be storing that on anything that's, you know, super valuable if you have got, you know, amazing timber hardwood floors. Now we're in the kitchen, we may as well get started on making our pumpkin soup. And while we're making our pumpkin soup, we can also save some of these seeds. So you want to save the seeds of your best pumpkins. So how do you know what is your best pumpkin? That is sort of entirely up to you, what you think is going to be the best pumpkin, whether that is like the biggest pumpkin from your pumpkin patch, whether that is the sweetest, the most flavoursome pumpkin, which is something that you're not going to know unless you try the pumpkin. So save some of the seeds, and whilst they're drying out, because what we're going to do is we're going to wash off all of the flesh from the pumpkin seeds, we're going to dry them out, and that's going to take a few days. While that's happening, you can be eating the pumpkin and you can decide whether that is the best pumpkin. So once the seeds are completely dry, this might take a few days to a week, I'll pop them somewhere to store. I store mine in just a brown paper bag, write on the label what variety it is and when you've harvested it, and then you have your own sustainable source of seeds to plant next year. And the great thing about saving your own seeds is that those plants are already acclimatized to growing in your garden, so they're going to grow even better. To make the pumpkin soup, I chop up the pumpkin and pop it in a roasting dish and drizzle on the oil, and I like to add carrots for some extra sweetness as well, and then I just cook those until they're soft, and usually takes about 40-45 minutes. While the pumpkin is cooking, I chop up an onion and pop that into a large pot with a bit of oil and cook that down. Once it's soft and cooked through, I will add in a teaspoon of ground turmeric and a teaspoon of curry powder and just lightly toast that off, and then add in coconut milk, a tin of coconut milk, the cooked pumpkin and carrots, and then I just start to try and mix that through. Add a little bit of chili flakes, season with salt and pepper. I will also add in about 1.5 cups of water to get it into a soup consistency, so you can add more or less depending on how thick or thin you like your soup. Then I will finish off mixing it by blitzing it with my stick mixer. You could also use a blender for this. And then to top it off, I make some crispy pumpkin leaf chips, and they are so delicious. Just pick your young pumpkin leaves, chop them up, drizzle on a little bit of oil and season with salt. Then pop them in the oven for 5 to 10 minutes until they're crispy, usually around 180 degrees Celsius. Make sure you keep an eye on them, and then top them on your pumpkin soup for a little bit of extra crunch. And like I said earlier, if you are using the butternut squash, you can make the chips out of the skin and toast off the seeds. So the great thing about pumpkins is that you can use the whole plant. I like to use the leaves in stir fries and soups, as well as the flowers. And with the flowers, I just like to use the male flowers, and then I just remove the stamen, and you can use those stuffed or fresh in salads. You just want to use the male flowers, because if you are harvesting the female flowers, you're not going to get as many pumpkins.